friends. Welcome to We Are Marketing Happy, a healthcare marketing podcast. Each episode, we talk about how technology and innovation can help make healthcare easier and better for patients. Today, we're talking to Dustin Horn. He's the Associate Director of Digital Marketing and Communications from Siteman Cancer Center. Dustin has been in marketing at Siteman for over 12 years, giving him an interesting perspective on the innovations that have happened in patient care and engagement. So let's get into it. So Dustin, I'm really excited to hear your perspective about what platforms and tools you think have shifted the way patients access care during your career. I mean, 12 years, technology is completely different than it was 12 years ago. What do you think has made the biggest impact?
Yeah, that was kind of my thought initially, was about that it's maybe my perspective is a little bit dated than some others, although I know many of my colleagues in healthcare have been around a long time. So from my perspective, it's really been social media was by far the most influential. I can think of a number of instances where patient care was actually affected, but I think maybe one of the most interesting or compelling ones was a number of years ago. This wasn't recently, it's maybe as many as 7 or 8 years ago. We had a tweet, we had a follower of ours who was just very active in retweeting and messaging us, and someone that he was connected with sent something out about their child having a certain type of cancer and wondering if anyone could help. And he replied to them and he tagged us in the tweet. And when I looked at it, I thought, wow, this sounds compelling. It looks legitimate. I think this is something we might be able to help with. I took the message and I sent it over to one of our pediatric oncologists, and that doctor said, yeah, I think we could help. I think this would be a good instance of where we could intervene here. And I said, okay, great. So we used Twitter to exchange contact information and connect those folks with that particular doctor. And those instances happen all the time. Frankly, people probably share a little bit more private health information or protected health information than they should on social media at times. But at the same time, you can understand that sort of the anxiety and difficult nature of health issues, particularly serious ones like cancer, people do reach out on social media tools. And so that's been a big one where we've connected people with those. I think another big one is really be AI or chat bots, anything around that. Some health systems have really focused on sort of the voice recognition piece. And I haven't really delved into that a whole lot myself, but I've heard from other health systems that have. Rather, we use AI more in the form of a chat bot that also allows for live chat as well. That's been a big one. We actually get quite a few people who are happy to then become patients based on the interaction that happens on that live chat, and even somewhat on the chat bot itself. We're able to use our normal call center and use the HIPAA protected, setup there to keep everyone safe and the information safe. So it's been a real boost to us as well, sort of meeting patients where they're at. And then finally, the last thing would be, things like MyChart, Epic, where people can schedule or even send emails. I personally have used that tool quite a bit to even schedule, primary care health appointments personally. But, probably the biggest one has been the social media.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it allows people to feel like they're taking more control and being more in charge of finding care, right? It is shocking how advanced AI has become, where text bots can be more intelligent. I never really thought I'd see a day where it would be this successful. So yeah, it's interesting. So what do you think is next? What's the next big innovation? What have you been watching? What do you think? What have you seen at other systems, maybe on a trial basis, that you are either considering doing at Siteman or been interesting to you personally?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot in my career. And the place where I work, Siteman, part of Washington University School of Medicine, it's a very entrepreneurial campus, and in the mindset of the physicians and researchers, many people on campus is very entrepreneurial. And so where could we be out on the leading edge? And really many Washington University doctors have pioneered new therapies, things that are used across the world today. So I think about that in our space as well. And it's a little bit difficult. And I'll say this, I think the biggest thing, here, let me step back 1 second. At a number of talks that I've been to over my career, and let's say the past 5 years. One of the big ones was Google Glass, right? This was one of the big things that was going to happen. And we're going to leverage this in healthcare. And I saw some great presentations on it. The problem was the adoption of Google Glass never really took off. And so I think probably it's not really new, but probably the next thing is the way wearables interact with healthcare. The problem is that piece about access and who can afford a really good wearable today that has the ability to transmit information in certain ways that are most effective is maybe not where it needs to be. The other part is also just understanding of how wearables work. I mean, even just sometimes that small screen is very difficult to know when it's on and what it's tracking and when. And so I think that's part of the issue. But I think overall that wearables will probably be one of the biggest things. That's not really super new, right? We've been talking about that for some time. Really, I hate to give kind of a non-answer, but I think what it comes down to is what kind of technology are being really adopted by users holistically, because therein lies the next path for healthcare. As a healthcare marketer and somebody who's been interested in technology for a long time, you think about the iPhone, social media, which we just discussed. Those are the things that then once they had widespread adoption by the general public, then healthcare started to move in and utilize those things. And whether it be the iPhone or it be Android or these app stores, right now we started launching apps and they're really useful. A lot of healthcare companies and technology companies are involved in partnering together to develop better apps. And some of those work with the wearables. So I think it'll come down to if we can get even wider adoption of the wearable technologies and people's willingness to then utilize those tools effectively and share their data with their providers. I think if we can build the trust necessary for that, I think that would probably be one of the big things. And then as we were talking about AI, I think there's going to be new developments with AI maybe that I can't foresee today that could potentially be even bigger than chatbots and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about all of this technology and the exciting things it's going to bring, but it's probably going to bring a whole bunch of headaches first. So what has been your biggest frustration specifically with marketing related technology? And have you found any ways over the last 12 years to really overcome those frustrations to leverage the tools more effectively?
So again, I would kind of tilt this question a little bit differently and say that it's not as much a frustration with the technology itself. It's maybe more of a frustration with leveraging it as effectively as possible in the healthcare space. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean by that is like thinking about marketing automation, CRM, and these types of things. This is fairly easy to do. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to characterize it as anyone can do it. But if you have the right people in place, doing marketing automation and CRM is not overly difficult to do when you don't have to be overly careful about protecting information or communicating at a bad time. So with healthcare, you can think about it like this. How terrible would it be for you to get the wrong message at the wrong time via a marketing automation platform, right? If it could just be so detrimental to your relationship with the patient, right? And so these things have to be done really carefully, and then integrating them and keeping all of their protected health information actually protected is another really, it is a frustration. And it's not really the technology that's the problem. It's being able to integrate it effectively in the healthcare space and then leverage it to its full measure in the healthcare space due to the nature of what we do, of having to make sure our messaging is correct, it is accurate, it is timely, and that it's not going to fall at the wrong time. Yeah. Also, that we're protecting individuals' information. So I think that's the biggest frustration, really.
Yep. Absolutely. So, and that completely makes sense. So when I think that about the new technology coming out, and even things like understanding HIPAA and high tech, our roles are continuously shifting as marketers in healthcare. What training or tools do you use to make sure that you're staying up to date, both around regulations around what you do, and then also the technical components?
You know, it's interesting. The old saying, the best way to learn is to teach. And so, really, the way I stay on top of it, I actually teach digital marketing at a local liberal arts university. And I've done that since about 2018. That is really how I stay on top of it. There's nothing more compelling about having to be right than marking points off somebody's score and you being wrong when you mark those points off, right? And them coming back and say, actually, that's not true, right? So you have to stay up to date, really, just for your own safety in those situations. And so that's one of the main ways that it forces me to continue to learn myself, because if I'm going to teach, I have to really be also learning. My boss always said too that I'm teaching at our organization, right? And so I work at one of the premier research institutions in the entire world, and a national leader in cancer care. So you might guess that we have a few brilliant people around. And so when you're in the place of teaching brilliant people, it's a challenging spot to be in. And you have to have a great deal of patience with it, right? Because many of those people are very accomplished themselves. They're also excellent learners. That's how they sort of got to where they are. And they'll challenge you in ways that if you don't have the stomach for it, it can be very difficult. So between, being challenged by my students and being challenged by my colleagues who are some of the sort of top in their field, I have to continually learn and absorb information. A couple of the ways I do that is, certain websites I rely on, but even more so is conferences, relationships I have throughout the industry, really just staying plugged in with the right people and those who I know put out quality information. And I don't really lean on any one piece any harder than, any more so than the other. I'd like to accumulate as much information as I can from as many resources as I can. Even sometimes information will come from places you don't expect. You'll just be in a meeting and you'll overhear something that really changes how you think and how you go about it. And so I think it's really just keeping a learner's mindset all of the time. And as I said, being a little bit on your toes for the challenges that you might undertake when you're teaching.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think you'd be a phenomenal professor to have. It would be fun to sit in on one of your classes.
Well, unfortunately, it's online only. So I do like video lectures, but it's not the same level of great interaction that you might have if you're standing in front of a classroom, because I do wish it was like that, but I don't live particularly close to the university. So that would be a little tricky. Also, then obviously after 2020, many of these courses went online, but I was teaching online already. So, it kind of is what it is, but I do hope one day to teach a little bit in person. I think it would be fun to bring in, much like this podcast scenario, right?
Yeah.
Bring in other experts and have them talk. And I think it would bring a new perspective. So I hope to one day be able to do that myself.
I love it. Okay, so 12 years at Siteman. Let's step back, big picture. What is the biggest accomplishment you're most proud of at this point that you feel like's had the most positive impact on patients? Because that story about Twitter was so meaningful. Like, you could have literally changed that family's life trajectory. What have you done in your career that you can step back and say, yeah, I did that?
Well, that's a really big one. I would have to say that it's really revolutionizing the whole of my institution's digital footprint and communication. To take it way back, when I arrived at Siteman, it had a completely out of date website. Then there was a new site sitting on a test server waiting for me to launch it. Back in those days, I was actually doing some hand coding of HTML and CSS, so I had to do a little bit of that to get this site ready. There wasn't a bunch of money to spend with agencies and that sort of thing. The digital shift hadn't really happened in a big way in healthcare at that time. And so getting resources was really, so the biggest impact, I would say, is really just changing that website, changing the social media footprint as well. I launched our Twitter page. I took over our Facebook account at the time. Certainly many others that I've hired and worked with have contributed to especially the social media in a big way. But it's really changing the mindset at the organization. And that's sort of something I've been proud of my entire career. Prior to healthcare, I was in news. And I remember it's easier to tell stories about jobs that you don't have anymore than it is about jobs you currently have, because your colleagues might hear these things and I would hate for them to take it the wrong way. But this was at a previous job. I remember it upset somebody that I had the job that I had in the newsroom. And I think because the person I replaced was one of his friends.
And for sure.
And he came to me one day, or I went up to ask him a question, and he gives me this sort of terrible look, and he goes, "What do you even do?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that's nice." And I said, and I'm I've been accused of being a little bit, quick with a response. And so I said, "I do a whole lot more than you know." It was my response to him, and I left it at that, and I walked away. And and then what happened was we had an incident, a major incident in town that happened. It would be small news in a big town, or in a big town, but it was really big news for the small town. And so the story came up, and he came to me and he goes, "Dustin, what do we do with this?" And it was funny. It was like, "I thought you were asking me what I even do. I don't know why you're asking me, what I can, what I'm supposed to do with this." So but I didn't twist too much. I just went ahead and I said,
Yep.
I know exactly what we can do with this. I said, I can build a section on the website. You funnel me as much information as you can. I'll do it as breaking news, and we'll just keep doing updates. Well, we drove so much traffic, we shut down the servers for the entire news organization that had something like 10 locations throughout
That's
the country.
amazing.
Yeah, because it was what people wanted at the time. They wanted to see imagery, wanted updates, and even though we couldn't give them everything they wanted, it was enough to keep them hooked and keep them coming back. And so more and more people were sharing the URL. Very similar things have happened in my current role, right? Very similar sort of, what is the value of this? I don't know why we're doing it. Why would I dedicate my time to it? That was in the early, days of sort of digital communication. And so I would say it's sticking with it, building that trust by doing really good work. And as a result, some of the brightest people, just like that individual at that news organization, came around and we ended up being great friends. And he really believed in the work I did after that. The same thing has happened in my current role. And today we have massive buy-in from some of the biggest names in medicine. They don't hesitate to jump in when we ask for their help. They know the value because they hear it from their patients. They know that they're looking at the things we do, and they also hear about it from their colleagues around the country when they go to meetings. So I'll end it with this. When I arrived at Siteman, it was not surprising to walk in a meeting with executives or physicians or physician executives and hear strong criticism of the website to your face, right? Of what you do. Today, that criticism doesn't exist. Instead, people are complimenting and then asking what they can do to help you build it better.
What a pivot.
That change is probably, what I would sort of hang my career at Siteman on.
Yeah. A lot of patient experiences have been impacted by that for sure. So what are you doing right now? What's your big initiative? What are you hoping to accomplish in the next year or two?
I think the biggest thing is really tracking our marketing in a new way. We really need to understand as healthcare marketers holistically what it is we do that actually has an impact on our audience. And this is not just about making revenue. Of course, that's important. We need to pay our doctors and staff and nurses and stuff, but we also need to really meet the audience needs, which are patients. And so we can't do that if we're not tracking and understanding what resonates with them. And so, today you still have this sort of talk between digital and traditional, and what's more effective and what's going to work. And we do have Siteman's located in St. Louis, obviously. So it's this thing where we do have some rural markets that really traditional might actually perform better with certain groups there, as to where digital is going to play better with this other group. And then sometimes we just make assumptions about that, right? We don't actually know the facts. We make assumptions about which one's going to work. If we're tracking marketing holistically through looking at digital lift, using custom URLs, vanity URLs, custom phone numbers, and that sort of thing, not for the purpose of tracking people and trying to tie that to actual individuals. We almost never do that. That's really not the motivation. The motivation is really to understand what resonates. And so if we know that when we go into a market about this particular type of cancer, this cancer screening, or this general awareness project, and we put these tracking mechanisms on it, we pull it into dashboards, we can look at pretty quickly what worked and what didn't. And I think when you're talking about tight budgets, when you're talking about proving ROI, this is what will sort of really revolutionize how we consider our spends and how it might actually change a spend in one piece of our market versus how we spend in another piece of our market. So that has been a goal of mine for quite some time, and it remains the goal of mine until we get it to a point where it's hard coded into how we work every day. But that's not how it is today. And so it's really continuing to get buy-in on that, educating people on the importance of it, and showing leadership why it's important and how it can help us be more effective.
That's super interesting. And we hear so many different health providers and healthcare providers and systems focusing on the same thing. But whenever you have all of these competing priorities and all of these different groups speaking into those priorities, how do you as a marketing leader decide what to prioritize each year as you're going into budgeting decisions? And what tips do you have for anybody else in healthcare marketing around decision trees or processes to be able to figure out what makes it into this year's budget versus what unfortunately may have to be pushed?
That's maybe the toughest question you've asked. So I would go about it like this: to think that you're going to, and maybe this isn't even just for marketing, right? This is really for all of life. To really think that you're going to make a plan and that plan is going to be executed without interruption, without change, is something that only, we as humans are naive enough to believe, right? It just never happens. I've made some excellent plans, both at work and in my personal life, that were just, man, they were really good. And, but I don't know that any of them have ever turned out exactly as I envisioned it. And that's probably best, no matter how good the planning was. So we do make a plan, a roadmap each year about what we'd like to do. We're also wise enough to pivot when needed. And also we have to respond to the needs of the organization. Sometimes even the needs of the patient might change. Inevitably, everything we're doing is for the patient, though. So what I would say is, when those distractions start to come in, you really have to look at the things that really aren't negotiable to you. And I think my dad said one time, I was talking to him about making some plans and to go out of town or to go camping or something. And he goes, yeah, Dustin, sometimes you just got to, make the plans and just do it. Like, you don't talk about you don't let the distraction or whatever comes up stop it. You just make the plans and you just do it no matter what. And I would say you should probably have a thing or two like that on your list it doesn't matter what happens, you're going to do it. For me, the tracking piece is like that. So I might make plans to reevaluate a paid search budget. For example, hey, there's probably going to be increased competition this year in this particular campaign. Really need to build a case for getting additional funding. While that's very important, that is sort of a smaller impact, in my opinion, of having this bigger tracking project completed changes all the other roadmaps from here on out, right? This campaign thing is a flash in the pan, and I don't even know for sure that the competition will increase. But what I do know for sure is that if we don't get the tracking right, if we don't understand what people are responding to and what they're not responding to, that will continue to guess in our marketing. And as we continue to guess, we'll inevitably have waste of time, waste of money, waste of just general resources. And so there's certain things that you say, this will change every other plan from here on out, and this won't. And so the things that will change every other plan are the things that I prioritize as really not negotiable. And that doesn't mean that I'm dropping my shoulder and running into people with it, but it means that I'm continuing to bring it up throughout the year at the right time, or what I perceive as the right time, with other decision makers, key opinion leaders, KOLs, that will help me get that to the finish line. It doesn't mean, again, that I'm running over people with it or I'm bringing it up every meeting. It means that I'm continually preaching the importance of it and how it will change things. And so it may not even happen by the end of the year, but if I'm keeping it moving along, then inevitably it will happen. So that's sort of how I do it, is I look at what's going to impact every other plan from here on out, and I try to mark those things as not negotiable.
That's a really smart way to tackle it. I really appreciate that perspective. So last question, and this is kind of one that I have been curious about your perspective on, is Siteman's a super well-known and well-respected brand, not just throughout the United States, but globally. Do you think that makes your job harder or easier, or both?
I think the easy answer is both. Probably where it gets nuanced is you have to talk about the project, which project it is, because the resourcing determines at what level you can do a project. So the good part is by working at site, you're always selling a good product, right? You're always selling something that you can believe in. I really believe that patients will be better for engaging with our system, that they will do better by coming to our doors, or at least getting a second opinion from us, that it will impact them in a positive way. So when you truly believe that, and I believe it because I've seen it, then that makes things much easier because you don't have to question the motive behind what you're doing. Then also, because of the recognition, it's fairly easy to sell too, because people know Siteman is to being a great place. Where it gets a little bit trickier is sometimes there is this assumption that because of your great reputation and sort of being known widely, that then you have unlimited resources. I think sometimes the idea of how money flows in healthcare leads people to think that marketing budgets are really high, and that I'm personally earning a monstrous amount of money, and then I'm spending monstrous amounts of money, and wow, it must be nice kind of thing. But that's really not the reality, right? And so I think at times people expect more from what I would consider to be a small project, because we don't always have the resources to do it at the level that I wish we could. So that's kind of what I would say. It just depends on the way you look at it and the situation in which you look at it. It both helps and sometimes is a little bit of a hindrance.
That's great. That's great. So anything that we have not talked about that you think is worthwhile sharing that our listeners would want to know?
Yeah, I think that if I could share one bit of thought or advice that has gotten me through. I work at a matrix organization, right? So this means we have BJC Healthcare, we have Washington University School of Medicine, we even have Washington University Physicians, and these are kind of all related institutions, but separate sort of entities within and of themselves. That makes for a lot of people to keep happy. You won't ever keep everyone happy. I think most of us at this point in our lives realize that. But the biggest thing that you can cultivate, the biggest personality trait that you can cultivate, that I think will be an indication of whether you're going to do well or you're going to enjoy your work, is your level of patience. To do this work really well, you have to be patient, and timing is vital. And if you can be patient and work on the timing and get that right, you won't get it right 100% of the time, but you'll be far more successful. If you're the type of person that has a really tough time with patience, healthcare marketing may not be the best field for you. You may need to find another place to be. But if you have patience and you can bring that with you as a tool in your personality and how you approach your work every day, I think you'll find that patience will be rewarded in a very meaningful way. If to you, healthcare marketing is really sort of a call to you, a call on your LinkedIn that you're compelled to do because of how you care for people. And not saying that if you're not in healthcare marketing, you don't care about people, but this is for many people the way in which they express. But with it, we want to make the changes now, not wait. But if you have the patience for it and you can stick with it, some things take a little while, but it's worth the payoff. That's kind of the last thing I would say, is that patience is key to being successful.
It's slowly pivoting a big ship at sea, isn't it? No sudden movements.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Dustin, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. For our listeners, we'll be sure to link Dustin's LinkedIn profile in the show notes if you want to connect with him. And thanks for tuning in to the We Are Marketing Happy podcast. We'll see you soon.